In ladles filled with sauce, my family taught me the keys to a spicy life. Good food, good company, and a lot of good tomatoes. On my Italian side, company was family and anyone who stopped by. There was always food to feed whoever was there. It was not fancy. In fact, it was peasant food. It was soups where bones were left in. I hated homemade soup until PBS cooking shows taught me how to strain the bones out of broths. I spent years making terrible broth, and now I am one of the best soup makers I know. You could get served soup at my grandparents' house with a neck bone in the bowl. It frightened me. Today, I want to give you a call back to the way food used to be so regional, so special to where you came from and who you were. Now with shipping and travel, we can eat just about anything, and our food does not necessarily reflect who we are and what we are about. Yet, food is the greatest connection to our senses and that wakes up our spirits. It's a time machine. Many people complain that they want a deeper, richer spiritual life. They complain they're not getting it at church. They complain they're not getting it at home. And yet they don't cook. Thank you. One of the ways the worship committee comes together is with food. I'm always amused when there are guests at our meetings and they go, "Oh, I didn't know it was like this." Not only do we cook for one another, we set beautiful tables. It is no wonder we wake up our spirits with taste and smells and textures and sounds. It is not to say you have to know how to cook to be on the worship committee. Maybe you need to know how to shop. Many say to break bread is the most elemental way to have communion. I want to urge you today to find as many ways into connecting through food as you can. Now, my grandmother made the best tomato sauce I have ever had. Unless, of course, you've had mine. Because I figured out what she did. I wish I could tell you I made sauce with her, telling stories and laughing and tasting on spoons. I wish I could tell you I had a Hallmark childhood, but I did not. It was not that kind of life. She had a life of extraordinary trauma, and some of you have heard those stories. Instead, I learned long after her ability to remember was gone, instead in flashes of memories that played back to me like Kodak snapshots. I can see her flowered dresses decorated with gardenia and cabbage rose prints, with sunlight behind her chestnut red hair as she stirs roasters of tomato sauce. I can see her silhouette with the sun coming through, as she dropped pieces of pork that slow cooked into a sweet gravy that would adhere to mustacholi and meatballs on Sundays, sometimes to Italian sausage, sometimes both. My grandparents' family Sunday dinners were so famous that once we were pictured on the front page of the Detroit Free Press as an example of family dinners. They told my grandfather they just wanted to stop by on a typical Sunday. Well, my grandfather was not going to have it be anything but typical and stuffed more than 40 of us around a string of tables linked together, going from the dining room into the living room with us, sort of grouped by age, and I'm this big down at the end of the table by the children. There were copies of that paper he was so proud of, framed in everyone's living room for decades. The salad would be mixed in the kitchen with vinegar, oil, salt, and pepper. It was so good. Why was it so good? The bread would be fresh from the Italian bakery, and it was sold in 1, 2, and 3 pound loaves. Do you know how big a 3 pound loaf of bread is? It's like the size of your arm. It's like this thunk on the table. Spices came in restaurant-sized containers. They really were restaurant-sized containers. Flour was stored in 50-pound barrels in the basement. Nothing was small. Saving money was key. Nothing was wasted. It also wasn't super clean because it was a busy kitchen and they really didn't have enough room. It served so many people, it needed to be 4 times as large as it was, but it was in use all the time, and it was trying to hold all these containers built for restaurants. And my grandmother wasn't fully well, and this wasn't fully her culture. If you ever come to my house, my kitchen is meticulously clean and organized. It is a direct result of not wanting it to be anything like that. And those are stories I want you to get to know. When you ask one another, what was food like growing up for you? Because even if you tell me stories about Wonder Bread and grape jelly, I will learn things about you, and I want to know. What kind? Did you have spices? What was the most important one? What was your fridge like? Did you have a fridge? We want to know here. We want to know you, we really do. We hold you in love. In many cultures, food and love go hand in hand. And how can we talk about liberating love as our monthly theme without talking about food and the ways that food has been the road to take us on a journey to get to know people better? Did your family have particular seasonal ingredients or recipes that were passed down from our ancestors? Can we really love anyone until we understand the food they grew up eating and how they live their liberating love in food today? I keep hearing people tell me they're not sure how to get to know people anymore, or they're not sure how to break age divides, or cultural divides, or religious divides, or political divides. My God, for the love of pie, talk about food. Talk about food. What if we don't cook, people say to me? Do you shop? Do you eat? Do you love a certain fruit? Have you splurged on a vegetable? Do you have a favorite food memory? I suggest food as a liberator to connecting our stories because we all eat. Food is often a place of pain. Go find out. Love people. The more and more I studied my Italian culture, the more I could not find recipes that quite reflected my grandmother's style of cooking or the region of Italy she was cooking from. Some sort of reflected northern Italy and some southern and some not Italy at all, and it turns out that was exactly correct. Little did I know my grandmother was not Italian, but Slovenian and Croatian and a Roma gypsy who had been trained by her in-laws to be an Italian wife. The way she cooked with stews and slow-cooked peasant food reflected both her growing up with people who had hid their culture and snuck into this country and hidden from authorities, and women who had hidden from men who hurt them. And not only that, her cooking reflected that and the Eastern European people who had taken her in when she was a child worker growing up in other people's homes, performing other people's cultures instead of her own. I ran across this quote that really struck me. With food, the easiest way to speak to someone is through something they already know. Christina Tosi, She owns the Milk Bar. Do any of you know what that is? I see a couple heads nodding. Yeah. If you're not familiar with Chef Tosi and the Milk Bar, her bakeries feature many recipes that use childhood flavors, and she got really famous by using cereal-flavored milk in recipes. Fruit Loops flavored milk and milk flavored with Frosted Flakes, right? And you can pay extravagant amounts of money for her cakes and bakeries, and you can order them online. And so your food memories do not have to be extravagant or gourmet, and who knows, you could become a millionaire off of it. But sometimes congregants approach me about wanting to connect with loved ones who've passed on or work out some huge trauma in their lives. And so they stop and see psychics and get their tarot cards read and palms and other fortune tellers. And they drop $100 here or there to people who commit spiritual, I would say, neglect and abuse on them. People who don't really care about them or know what they are doing. And I will tell you, you can learn more about that person who has passed on and their message to you if you spend some time pressing tortilla dough for a few hours or some other recipe that they have made. Pick up that cast iron pan over and over. You will get the message that your beloved abuela was trying to tell you. You want to go figure out what your dad was trying to get across? Was he a fisher? Go on the fishing trip and clean the fish. Pluck the chicken. Whatever the ancestral food is, whatever the thing is that loved one liked to eat, go learn it. Get into it. Experience it. I see a bunch of elbows happening right now. Whatever that thing is, if you are so lucky that the meal turns out, even better. But it might not, and that might be part of the lesson too. Even if the food is a disaster, you might learn something. You might look at the landscape that you're in. It might take time to learn. Working out will give you years to think about the loved one lost. When you're at the potluck today, ask people, what do you eat for breakfast? What did you eat every day as a child? In the book, The Theology of Food by Angel Mendez Montoya, she asserts that to share bread is to share God. And according to Harvard Divinity professor Myra Riviera, they say, insisting that food matters is that its enjoyment is a relevant theological concern. This elementary theology also affirms that bodies matter, for it is precisely the dichotomy between matter and divinity, between body and spirit, that gets at the heart of the matter, that magical moment we all know and have experienced. Who hasn't had a moment with some article of food at some point where you go, oh my God? And if you haven't, we need to talk. If food is stressful for you, if food holds pain, that's important too. And oh my dear, if you got to cook the meal that made someone say, oh my God, ooh, you've witnessed true communion, haven't you? If you have bit into a cucumber and you have tasted the sun blossom as the berry dripped down your lips, if passion has infused love into your soul, humanists, religious naturalists, Christians, my goodness, we can all rejoice together, can't we? Food here is also the expression Montoya describes as the interdependence between human communities of humanity with ecology and creation and God. And this idea really intrigued me, and it got me thinking about that film, The 100-Foot Journey. Have any of you seen that film or read the book? Okay, more homework. In a rare case, I actually recommend the film over the book. In the film, Helen Mirren is battling for another Michelin star in her movie with the Indian restaurant that's 100 feet across the road. And at first she despises the Indian restaurant for taking away from her beautiful French classical atmosphere, as she would, right? And then she comes to realize that the young chef possesses an ability to taste with a refined palate so rare, she knows that it cannot be trained, that he has what few chefs can ever come up with, right? And she wants to get him to come and be a chef at her restaurant so that she can seek another Michelin star. And in France, they talk about chefs as though they are gods in that way, the way Americans often look at athletes. My mom was once given a recipe for pie crust that used eggs, but it was not a choux pastry. Okay, choux pastry does use eggs and it's cooked and this and that, and she was not a guest on the British baking show where we might see that. So instead it was just a really bad recipe for crust, and it earned her a horrific reputation in our family. And people were so cruel to her about her first attempt to make pie crust because it was so hard that it was as hard as this pulpit. And people tried so hard to bite into it, they almost broke their teeth, right? I see people laughing. It was kind of funny now, right? And she spent another 20 years not making pie crust. And in my head, pie crust was hard. It was so hard, it was hard and it was difficult and you shouldn't try doing it yourself. And I grew up thinking pie was just something that could never be achieved. And then at some point I saw enough shows or I read enough recipes that I gave it a go, and I tried and I tried and I made crust over and over. And I love apple pie, and for years that's all I made. I thought, okay, I made apple pie, that's all you make. But then I branched out and I learned, oh, so many kinds of crust. And then I learned there's so many kinds of pie. And some of you know the stories of my peach tree, right? That's in my yard. Some people have attended a workshop or a lecture that I did, and I talked about my special peach tree and how I've grown the peaches. And there's a few people in here who've heard that, and maybe you'll find one of them at the potluck today. Or maybe you'll find my peach pie that's in the potluck today. And it's a pretzel crust today. James Beard says, food is our common ground, a universal experience, and there are so many stories in food to connect us and liberate us. Winona LaDuke says, food for us comes from our relatives, whether they have wings or fins or roots. That is how we consider food. Food has a culture, it has a history, it has a story, it has relationships. Go dig into yours. Amen.